Iran's military has been raised. What's left of its leadership is in complete disarray, and while the regime still tries to present a powerful front, plans are being made deep inside the Pentagon. The US is about to unleash something so big that it will end the Iran war. This is the final blow. Powerful, precise, and designed specifically to strip away every last piece of leverage that Iran's regime has left. We've been seeing the build-up to this over the last few weeks. On March the 28th, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, or MEU, accompanying the USS Tripoli and its small fleet of amphibious warships, finally arrived in the Persian Gulf. Soon, they will be joined by the prestigious 82nd Airborne Division, along with another Marine Expeditionary Unit, the 11th, which is deployed to the Persian Gulf by way of California. This is a buildup of manpower that Iran never saw coming, and it will soon mean that the US has around 5,000 Marines and around 3,000 paratroopers reportedly joining the approximately 50,000 personnel that it has stationed in the Middle East. The stage is being set. The Pentagon is preparing to deliver its final blow. As we speak, the Pentagon is simply waiting. It has planned weeks of ground operations, The Independent reported on March 29th, and it's believed by some that what the US has coming could take a couple of months to execute. There are rumors about what the final blow might include. Raids by Special Forces troops are being considered, as are attacks on key Iranian islands in the Strait of Hormuz, conducted by the MEUs and paratroopers we've already mentioned. The Independent says that the Pentagon's plans stop short of a full-blown ground invasion of the Iranian mainland, and that's indicated by the relatively limited number of Marines and paratroopers being sent to the Persian Gulf. Now, US President Donald Trump is also taking his time about making a decision, and he and his administration hope that Iran will capitulate before boots on the ground become necessary. We see that in comments made by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio on March 27th, as he said, "We can achieve all of our objectives without ground troops, but we are always going to be prepared to give the president maximum optionality and maximum opportunity to adjust to contingencies, should they emerge." How true that is remains to be seen as Iran tries to bed in and weather the storm of Operation Epic Fury. As for the US, this is a key juncture, and the Trump administration is sending every message that it can to Iran that it's willing to move Operation Epic Fury into a new phase. MEUs and paratroopers are en route or already arriving, and there are even more signs that the US is getting ready to launch the ground operation that it never thought it would need. And one of those signs is that F-35Cs are being moved into position. Now, that's according to the War Zone, which reported on March 24th that land-based Marine Corps F-35Cs are moving to the Persian Gulf region to provide support for the Marines who are arriving or already in the region. Those fifth-generation fighter jets have been moved to RAF Lakenheath in the UK, which signals that the US is getting ready for the first land-based deployment of its stealth fighter since the launch of Operation Epic Fury. F-35Cs have been used plenty of times before in this operation, of course, but up until this point, they've flown from aircraft carriers to conduct the precise strikes that often set up the aerial bombardment of other targets in mainland Iran. This is different, though. What we're seeing here is a buildup of F-35 airpower at a base that is well outside of the range of even Iran's best ballistic missiles, which tells us that the US is planning an operation that requires repeated strikes by jets that can return to a safe base in the immediate aftermath. This is the US bedding in for the multi-week or multi-month campaign that The Independent mentions. Now, the wind-up before the final blow that could end everything is delivered right to the regime's jaw. We see the build-up, but the question still remains, what will that final blow actually look like? Well, the Pentagon is keeping its lips tightly sealed, of course, as you would expect. Secrecy is paramount, because if the US tells us exactly what it intends to do, Iran's military will have time to respond and prepare. However, there are plenty of signals about what the final blow might look like, and they start with a small patch of land that everybody expects the US to hit: Kharg Island. Now, about a third of the size of Manhattan and located in the Persian Gulf, just a few miles away from the Iranian coast, Kharg Island is everything to Iran's regime. It's the jewel in the regime's crown, as it serves as a key oil hub that allows Iran to ship its oil to other nations, thus keeping billions of dollars every year pumping into the Iranian economy. We'll be coming back to all of that very soon. But the key here is that Kharg Island is the ultimate goal for the US, whether that means a straight takeover of the island's facilities or the use of that island as a lever against Iran. However, the US has a Kharg Island problem. If it's intending to land troops on that island, it needs to find a way to get to it first, and that isn't the easiest proposition in the world. And the reason is that Kharg Island lies beyond the Strait of Hormuz, inside the Persian Gulf. And adding to that problem is that there is no point, beyond the economic, of taking Kharg Island if the US isn't first able to gain control over that vital waterway. So it's clear that the final blow isn't going to be as simple as land marines and paratroopers on Kharg Island, take the oil infrastructure, and call it a job well done. More setup work has to be done first, and that work involves several other islands that the US may have to take with its ground forces to set up what it has planned for Kharg. Now, before getting to that, there's the reason the Strait of Hormuz matters at all to consider. The words "the strait is the only maritime passage out of the Gulf," published by The Guardian on March 16th, tells you almost all that you need to know. The Strait of Hormuz is a vital passage for merchant ships carrying oil and liquefied natural gas to and from countries in the Persian Gulf region. And beyond Iran, which has control over the strait and its pair of 2-mile-wide shipping lanes, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar all rely on this single waterway for their waterbound trade. At just 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is relatively easy to patrol for Iran, and it is a key point of leverage for Iran. About 20% of the entire world's supply of oil and liquefied natural gas flows through this strait every year, and Iran has been taking advantage of that fact with a blockade using drones, anti-ship missiles, and fast boats that make it practically impossible for merchant ships to sail through the strait. Iran knows that whoever controls the Strait of Hormuz also controls the flow of money in the Persian Gulf region. The US knows it too, and it also knows that Iran's control over the waterway puts its plans for Kharg Island in jeopardy. I mean, after all, any MEU that attempts to land on Kharg Island first has to transit the strait, and that's easier said than done given Iran's asymmetric and often lethal blockade of the waterway. Iran is taking advantage of its position as best as it can. Now, according to CNN, one of Iran's key demands for the end of Operation Epic Fury is the recognition of Iran's total sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. That would make the strait a source of billions of dollars every year for Iran, in addition to giving it even more leverage over the other Gulf nations that rely on the waterway. And even as we speak, Iran is charging merchant ships massive tolls, running as high as $2 million for safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, reinforcing its ability to control the strait. Now, for the US to deliver the final blow to Kharg Island, something first has to be done about Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz. And there just so happens to be other islands that are part of the equation that the US may target before it makes its move on Kharg with its MEUs and paratroopers. That alone changes everything for Iran, but before we dive deeper, this is just a quick reminder that you're watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to hit that button. Now, lying within the Strait of Hormuz are several islands that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, has militarized to extend Iran's control over the whole region. So, the starting point of America's final blow against Iran becomes very simple. Take the IRGC's militarized islands and you control the Strait of Hormuz. And with that control comes the ability to halt Iran's attacks on merchant shipping, along with the ability to send MEUs through the strait, deep into the Persian Gulf, and on to Kharg Island. Now, Iran isn't going to make it easy. It has the fast attack boats we mentioned earlier. Iran has autonomous vessels it can use to launch attacks, and it is believed to be attempting to mine the Strait of Hormuz to make passage even more difficult. But the US has to get through the strait to get to Kharg. And here's where things get serious. Of the islands that the US may look to take with its MEUs and paratroopers is Larak. An established strategic outpost for Iran, Larak is home to bunkers, several Iranian attack craft or drones that the regime can use to attack merchant ships, along with radar systems that Iran uses to monitor movements within the Strait of Hormuz. Now, some of Iran's fast boats are also believed to be launched from this island, so taking it is a priority for the US as it prepares to deliver its final blow. More details about Larak come from JFeed. It says that Iran maintains a Russian-supplied satellite communications jamming system on this island, along with air defense systems, all of which are protected by IRGC Navy troops and the fast boats that we mentioned earlier. Now, Iran has militarized the island to as much of a degree as it can manage for a piece of land that is so small. For the US, the taking of Larak sets the stage for everything else that it wants to deliver with its final blow to Iran. But it's inaccurate to say that when Larak falls, Iran's posture in the Strait of Hormuz immediately crumbles, but it would weaken severely. Losing some radars means that Iran can't track merchant ships or US Navy vessels entering the strait that efficiently anymore, which limits attacks on both. An MEU that takes and holds this island could also empty the bunkers, cripple the fast boats, and turn what has so far been a key strategic asset for Iran's Strait of Hormuz blockade into one of the most important military nodes that the US can use to reopen that very waterway. But beyond all of that, the toppling of Larak serves another purpose. It paves the way for the US to take other key islands in the Strait of Hormuz. With Larak under control, the US can turn its attention toward another island, named Abu Musa, along with islands that include Hormuz, Keshem, Greater Toomb, and Lesser Toomb. Not one of these islands on its own presents an insurmountable threat to the US and its plans for Kharg Island. But put them together, and you get what has become known as Iran's arch defense in the Strait of Hormuz. Writing for the Canadian Centre of Science and Education, researchers Mayensha and Inayatollah Yazdani explained why this arch of islands is so critical to Iran. A hypothetical curve connecting these islands would further help to understand Iran's strategic superiority in controlling the security, the researchers explained. And they noted that Abu Musa, Greater Toomb, and Lesser Toomb are the keys to the Strait of Hormuz control. That's what the US would have to hit after Larak. Now, all three of these islands sit in the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, and there just so happens to be a third party that has an interest in them. The United Arab Emirates has long disputed Iran's control over this trio of islands, which sets up the possibility that the US could work out a deal with the UAE, perhaps for some sort of joint operation. UAE support could be provided in exchange for the US handing control over Abu Musa, Greater Toomb, and Lesser Toomb to the UAE, thus weakening Iran's position in the Strait of Hormuz while strengthening the position of a US ally. But that would all be for the future. In the context of the final blow that the Pentagon is preparing to deliver to Iran, all of these islands in the Strait of Hormuz are dominoes. The US needs them all to fall, and its MEUs and paratroopers may be heading in to take each out one by one to open up a clear pathway through the strait that leads right to Kharg Island. So, we see the gist of what the plan might be, but how does the US execute on it? Well, the goal here is to get to Kharg Island. For the US, taking that island may not even be a necessity. If it can remove Iran's influence from the Strait of Hormuz by taking the other islands that we've discussed, the US might be able to force Iran to the negotiating table. After all, losing the islands means losing control over the Strait of Hormuz. The US could create its own blockade to prevent oil from leaving Kharg Island if it topples Iran's arch defense, which could mean that the seizure of Kharg Island wouldn't even be needed. The 90% of Iran's oil exports and the billions of dollars in revenue that they generate could be controlled by the US Navy, preventing merchant ships from reaching Kharg while allowing those that work with allies in the Persian Gulf to transit. Iran would have lost many of its attack options with the arch defense gone too, which, when combined with a US presence, makes the strait much safer. Now, in short, the US could restart the Strait of Hormuz, leave Kharg Island untouched, and still bleed Iran dry of the money that it needs to fund its defense against Operation Epic Fury. Now, that would make the final blow a slap in the face after the US delivers body blow after body blow by taking Iran's smaller islands. Now, as for how the US would pull it off, we gave you a clue earlier in the video when we mentioned how the US is stationing F-35s at an RAF base. Air superiority has already been achieved in Iran, including over the Strait of Hormuz, and that's why the US has been able to deploy A-10 Warthog attack aircraft and Apache helicopters in the waterway. Neither has much in the way of stealth options, but they're both on the attack against Iran's fast boats and drones because Iran can't do much about them. Add F-35s into the mix, and you get an aerial force that could bombard the likes of Larak and Abu Musa ahead of America's MEUs and paratroopers landing and taking control over the islands. The arch defense would crumble under the overwhelming air power, and the ground forces would go in to assert control, clear bunkers, and fortify the island ahead of the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and blockading Iran. Kharg Island would fall through negotiation, not by force. That's one option. The other would have to be deployed if Iran digs its heels in and decides not to capitulate, even as its stranglehold over the Strait of Hormuz is released. Now that's when the situation would escalate even further. With its MEUs controlling the arch defense islands, the US would likely send more troops into the Middle East or call on the 50,000 soldiers it has stationed in the region. Their job would be to take Kharg Island by force, stripping away what Trump has called the crown jewel of the Iranian regime in the process. This would ruin the regime's ability to get its hands on war funds, and the US has already laid the groundwork for a ground invasion of Kharg. On March 13th, the US unleashed a devastating series of airstrikes that destroyed much of the military infrastructure on Kharg Island, including missile storage bunkers, naval mine storage facilities, air defenses, and an airport control tower. Now, the US left Kharg's oil facilities untouched, and Iran is trying to prepare for a ground assault against the island. According to CNN, Iran has been building up defenses again since March 13th, having moved shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile systems to the island, along with laying anti-armor and anti-personnel mines around Kharg's coast. Now, those booby traps could be a major problem for America's amphibious landing crafts and their forces. As for the air defenses, Iran may be banking on weathering the storm of F-35 assaults that those defenses aren't designed to handle, and would instead focus on attempting isolated strikes against A-10s and Apaches. These aren't strong defenses, but they do have the ability to cause casualties as the US takes Kharg Island. That's why the US would prefer the final blow to lead to Iran's capitulation of Kharg Island and perhaps even the end of Operation Epic Fury, rather than a ground assault on the island. The arch defense is key. Cripple that, and the Strait of Hormuz transforms from America's problem to Iran's. It would be a leveraged turnaround, and the US hopes that Iran would be able to deal with it. As for Iran, it knows that the US is winding up, even if it doesn't know precisely what the US plans to do. We see that in its attempts to reinforce Kharg Island's shattered defenses, and the Speaker of the country's parliament, Bagar Ghalibaf, has outright declared that the regime believes something is coming. Iran's enemies, with the support of a country in the region, are preparing an operation to occupy one of Iran's islands, Ghalibaf has claimed. Iran's problem is that it doesn't actually know which island. Kharg seems the most obvious choice, and the US could still invade it via an ally in the Persian Gulf, which would mean it bypasses the Strait of Hormuz and the arch defense in the process. But that doesn't solve the problem of Iran's leverage in the waterway. The approach that we've outlined in this video could still in theory involve allies, especially the UAE, due to its disputes with Iran over several of the arch defense islands. And it would set the stage for the final blow on Kharg to be delivered at the negotiating table or by direct force. Whichever option Iran chooses, it loses. And that's precisely the position in which the US wants to put Iran. There is a lot more to know about America's potential plans for Kharg Island, and especially about the 82nd Airborne Division that is sending Iran's way. We published a video covering how the US could change the Strait of Hormuz forever with this division, so check it out if you want to dive deeper into the Kharg Island challenge. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show so you don't miss any of our analysis of Operation Epic Fury.